Some residents with swallowing problems, also known as dysphagia, may need special diets or equipment to help them swallow safely.
So what normally happens when food and drink is going down the right way, so we chew the food or we get the drink and hold it kind of centrally in the mouth, and then we move it backwards. And then when it gets so far, the swallow triggers, and that does lots of things. It closes the vocal folds off, it raises the vocal folds up, it flips the epiglottis down, which protects the airway, and then the food or drink kind of whizzes past that, misses that, and goes into the esophagus, which is the food pipe, and down into the stomach. But sometimes that can go wrong when someone has dysphagia. So we could have a problem with the vocal folds closing, or the epiglottis not coming down, the airway might not be protected, and particularly if the swallow is not coordinated, and food and drink might enter the airway or the windpipe rather than going into the esophagus. And there's lots of reasons why someone might develop dysphagia, and usually in older people where they've been healthy kind of most of their lives, it's usually because they've developed some kind of neurological problem. So often stroke or tumour, but commonly, particularly in care homes, we have lots of people with dementia, and the dementias can lead to swallowing problems or dysphagia. You might also come across people with progressive neurological conditions, and they can often lead to swallowing problems for people too. So things like Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, Huntington's disease can also contribute to swallowing problems. So a speech and language therapist might recommend fluid thickener for a resident if their swallow perhaps isn't working as it should. So sometimes, particularly where someone has dementia or following a stroke, the swallow process can slow down, and it might take a person a lot longer to be able to get them bits of the mouth to do what they need to do to be able to swallow safely. So the good thing about a thickener is it actually slows down how quickly the fluid moves in the mouth, and it gives the swallow process a bit longer to do its thing and to be able to cope with the fluid that's coming that way. So that tends to be why thickened fluids are recommended for people.
Thickened fluids need to be prepared accurately to ensure they are at the recommended thickness for each individual.
There are 3 stages of fluid consistency: syrup, which you can drink from the glass, custard, which you can also drink from the glass, and pudding, which you will have to feed with a spoon. Remember to check residents' notes to see which fluid consistency they require. Stage 1 syrup consistency runs quickly through the prongs and leaves thin coating in a bag. Stage 2 custard consistency drizzles through the prongs and leaves thick coating in a bag. Stage 3 consistency holds its shape on a fork.
It's really important that the individual gets the recommended kind of level of thickener in their drinks, and that they're not given too much thickener or too little thickener in their drinks. And there's lots of reasons why that's really important. So the obvious one is, the speech and language therapist has assessed that person and made that recommendation of that particular consistency because they feel that's the safest consistency for that individual. So if we start to play around with that without assessing that properly, it can cause problems like coughing and choking for the individual. They might not be able to tolerate a thinner or even thicker fluid. It can also cause more subtle problems like dehydration or lack of enjoyment from the fluid, which can then contribute to dehydration for that individual.
There are 2 different types of thickener, the starch-based one and the gum-based one. They need to be made up differently, so please read the label for instructions. First, I'm going to show you how to make up a drink using a starch-based thickener. Pour the liquid into the glass first. and then add thickener to it. Stir until it's well combined. Here I've used water, but you may find that if you use other liquids like milk, tea or juices, they may mix up to different consistency. You can use a fork to check if the consistency is right. To make up a drink using gum-based thickener, you will need to put the thickener first. Stir very well for about 2 minutes until it's well combined. This one takes a little bit longer to combine, but whichever fluid you use will come up to the same consistency. Again, make sure you use fork to check the consistency that's suitable for the resident.
Although the thickener doesn't really change the taste of the fluid, it obviously changes the texture. And for plain water, that can make it quite unpalatable for lots of people. So we tend to find that flavoured water is tolerated and enjoyed a lot more by people rather than plain water that's thickened. The other thing that I think is important to think about is how we facilitate and how we support somebody when they're drinking. And I think this is probably one of the most important things actually when someone is needing that support. So thinking about the communication that we're using and the verbal cues that we're giving that person. So reminding them that the drink's on its way, you know, perhaps they might need reminding to take a swallow, checking if they're ready for another sip before we start again. And also thinking about using hand over hand feeding, so that we're giving that person, even if they're not able to feed themselves, we're giving them that awareness that the drink is coming, and that will help their body to prepare the swallow and to swallow more safely. So another thing we need to be aware of are spouted beakers, because a spouted beaker actually can kind of position and force the liquid a bit further back in the mouth. And if somebody's got a slower swallow anyway, it's taking time away from them to enable them to be able to swallow that safely. I think generally speaking, for the vast majority of people, an open cup is better, and that's because they're more likely to take their time with it and not rush. Sometimes I think it's easy to forget that that contact that you're having with that individual might be the only social contact they're going to have, or the main social contact that they're going to have that day. So it's more than just about getting somebody to drink, it's also about the opportunity to interact and, you know, have some social interaction with other people as well.